He didn't need to speak. His presence alone unsettled the room. Eyes tracked him not with curiosity, but calculation, like they were waiting for a mistake he hadn't made yet. Whispers passed before his shadow hit the tile. It wasn't the suit, the watch, or the posture that made them uneasy. It was the quiet confidence of a black man they couldn't place and didn't think belonged. By the time security moved, assumptions had already passed sentence. No ID, no explanation, no hesitation. Just force. What followed wasn't chaos, it was choreography. Rehearsed, precise, and absolutely wrong. But the real shock? That came later, when the truth cracked the mask they'd built around him. This is the story they didn't want told. If that opening made you stop and think, hit like, subscribe for the rest, and tell me in the comments, what was your first reaction, and where are you watching from? The morning air was crisp in downtown San Francisco as Enoch Bradley exited his black SUV and strode confidently toward the grand glass entrance of Argent Bank. Dressed in a custom charcoal wool suit, shoes polished to a mirror shine, and a slate blue silk tie neatly pinned, Enoch exuded composure. His posture was regal, measured, the kind honed by years in the upper echelons of finance. His face, calm, thoughtful, revealed nothing of the enormous transfer he was about to authorize. Inside his briefcase was documentation for a multi-million-dollar cross-border investment deal that would close within the hour. Argent Bank had been his chosen institution for years, managing both his personal and corporate wealth. But none of that mattered as he stepped through the revolving doors. The lobby of Argent Bank was a shrine to modern opulence. Sleek marble floors, towering columns, crystal chandeliers, and an atmosphere of silent wealth. Enoch crossed the floor and approached the front desk. The receptionist, a pale young woman with clipped bangs and a vaguely irritated expression, glanced up, then did a double take. Her eyes flicked to his dark skin, then to the bank's ultra-secure executive services area beyond the velvet rope. "I'm here to authorize a high-value transfer," Enoch said smoothly, handing over his driver's license and account documents. The receptionist frowned. "Hold on," she muttered, tapping into her terminal. A few seconds passed. Her brow creased. "One moment, please." She didn't look at him again. Without explanation, she picked up the phone and made a call. Moments later, two thick-necked security guards emerged from the hallway to the left. They moved quickly, too quickly. "Sir, we need you to step aside," said the taller one. "Why?" Enoch asked calmly. The shorter guard didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed Enoch's arm. "Excuse me," Enoch began, startled. Then it happened. With practiced force, they yanked him backward and slammed him down onto the cold marble floor. His briefcase flew from his hand, papers scattering like snow. One guard pinned his shoulder, while the other pressed a knee into the small of his back. "I have ID," Enoch said through gritted teeth. "That's my account. You're making a mistake. Tell it to the cops," the guard barked. Around them, a crowd formed, bankers in suits, clients in heels and ties, a few elderly couples waiting for teller service. None intervened. Some whispered. Others took out their phones. "That's enough," someone murmured, but too softly. A nearby manager stepped forward, speaking into a radio. Possible fraud attempt in the executive wing. Black male, mid-30s, ID possibly forged. "I'm Enoch Bradley," Enoch said again, trying to lift his head. The name meant nothing here. One of the guards grabbed his phone and wallet. "Probably fake," he muttered, flipping through it. "No way this guy's running executive transfers. These scam rings are getting bold. Snap a photo for records," the other guard said. A flash went off. Dana, the teller from the private banking line, walked up and peered down at him. He said he was an executive account holder, she said with a sneer. "Didn't look right to me." "He doesn't belong here," someone said. "Looks like a staged identity," another added. Enoch's face burned against the marble. Two uniformed officers arrived 10 minutes later. They didn't ask questions. They cuffed him, hauled him to his feet, and walked him out through the bank's towering glass doors. The guard smirked as he passed. Outside, traffic hummed and pedestrians stared. A woman gasped. Someone shouted, "Hey, what did he do?" Another voice said, "Figures." Inside the patrol car, Enoch sat silently. He didn't struggle. He didn't shout. He simply watched his reflection in the scratched plexiglass of the divider, his face expressionless. At the precinct, the booking process was routine, except for Enoch. He was fingerprinted, photographed, and questioned without a lawyer. When he asked for one, he was told to wait. He sat in a cell for 4 hours. No one called him by name. They referred to him as the suspect. Finally, a detective returned and said, "Looks like the ID might check out." "Might?" Enoch asked. "We've had scammers with legit-looking IDs before," the detective said. "Sit tight while we confirm." It took another 2 hours for someone, finally, to realize the mistake. A call came in from Argent Bank's legal department. Apparently, they had cross-referenced the wrong account. Enoch was released without apology. The guards handed back his belongings, but not before they'd gone through everything. His phone was rearranged. His wallet had been emptied and shoved back together haphazardly. His briefcase was torn at one hinge. He stepped into the night, San Francisco's city lights flickering above. He walked to a quiet bench outside the bank, checked his phone. Dozens of missed calls, hundreds of messages, one video link. The caption read, "Black fraudster caught at high-end bank, tries to steal exec account." The next morning, Enoch Bradley sat at his kitchen table in the minimalist penthouse he rarely had time to enjoy. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the Bay Bridge, but the beauty meant nothing. His mind was still in that bank, still pressed against the marble floor, his name being doubted, his humanity erased. The air in his apartment felt too clean, too sterile, as if nothing outside these walls could match the ugly truth of what had just happened. He hadn't slept. How could he? He had spent hours scrolling through the video on loop, not because he wanted to, but because he needed to understand how the world saw him. Every pause, every sneer, every phone camera catching his humiliation played back in his head like a cruel joke. The comments were still flooding in, thousands by the hour. Enoch Bradley, the man who had dined with world leaders and negotiated billion-dollar deals in 6 languages, had become a meme, reduced to a snapshot of a man on the ground, begging to be heard. He rubbed his temple and opened his banking app, hoping to stabilize at least one part of his world. The app wouldn't load. The screen glitched, then locked him out. A notice appeared, "Access denied. Please contact your financial institution." Confused, he tried another app. The same thing. Then another. Everything was frozen. Alarm rising, he called his assistant. "Tamara, check the Argent account, personal and corporate. Tell me what you see." She paused. "Sir, I'm locked out. I thought it was a server issue, but I just got a message that our accounts have been flagged." "Flagged?" he asked slowly. "Why?" "It doesn't say. Just flagged for suspicious activity. They locked down everything." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. He already knew what this was. It wasn't a mistake. It was retaliation. His face was everywhere now, and the bank had gone on the defensive. In their silence, they'd chosen a side. He hung up and called the executive line at Argent. The number he'd used dozens of times. It rang 5 times, then 10. Finally, an operator answered. "This is Argent Bank. All lines are currently under heavy volume. Please hold." He was transferred to a general support agent, not a vice president, not even a supervisor. A girl who sounded like she hadn't finished her morning coffee. "Mr. Bradley, it says here that your accounts are frozen pending investigation." "Investigation into what?" he asked, his voice sharp. "It doesn't say. All I can see is a red flag on your profile. I'm not authorized to say more." "Then connect me to someone who is." "I'll try, but they've put a blanket on all inquiries related to your file. There's a legal hold." "A legal hold?" "Yes, sir." The line went dead. He looked down at the table, hands flat, and breathed in through his nose. Something deeper was at play. He hadn't just been humiliated. They were trying to erase him. The warning signs mounted fast. His email was hit with auto-replies from colleagues saying their messages had been returned. One of his investment accounts sent a cryptic notice that his balance was under review. Then came the worst one. His phone buzzed with a call from a familiar number. His attorney. "Enoch, we've got a problem," the voice said. "Argent's legal team filed a fraud alert on your behalf without telling you. They're claiming you attempted to access restricted client data using false credentials. That video? It's being spun as evidence." "That was my account," Enoch said, enunciating each word. "They know it." "Doesn't matter," his attorney replied. "They've already reported it to a federal database. Now other institutions are freezing your affiliations." "How many?" Enoch asked. "All of them." He ended the call and stared at his phone. As if on cue, it buzzed again. This time it was a text from an old contact inside Argent, one who owed him a favor. The message read, "Internal chat logs say your ID was tossed in the trash. Guard said, this guy says he's Enoch Bradley. Looks more like a Jamal." They laughed. "Took a selfie with your phone. Called you another faker." They even started a group thread to share the photo. Enoch's jaw clenched so hard it ached. He gripped the edge of the counter to steady himself. They had violated every possible boundary, and now they were trading his dignity like it was entertainment. He stared out the window at the glittering skyline and felt something break inside. Not rage, not yet. Just the kind of hollow silence that came when a man was completely stripped of control. By noon, the story had evolved. The bank released a short statement to the press. "We take all customer complaints seriously. However, due to a potential data breach and unauthorized access attempt, we are conducting a full review of yesterday's incident. No further comments." That lie became fuel. The news twisted it. Argent Bank targeted in sophisticated scam attempt by impersonator. The headline didn't mention Enoch's name, but the image below the fold told the story. Him on the ground, suit wrinkled, arms behind his back. He didn't need to read the comments. He already knew the tone. Tamara called again. "We've been contacted by a journalist," she said. "They want to know if the allegations are true." "What allegations?" "They're saying you tried to breach client data. Something about high-level fraud. They're not even calling you by name. They're calling you a masked player in a corporate intrusion ring." Enoch said nothing. He picked up his broken briefcase and opened it slowly. Inside, the signed authorization documents were still there, creased and stained. Evidence of the truth, sitting useless in his lap. The bank didn't care. The public didn't care. They'd already chosen the story they wanted to believe. The first sign of something more sinister came when he attempted to use a backup card to buy coffee. Declined. The barista gave a tired look, as if Enoch were just another customer wasting time. He tried a second card. Declined again. He left the coffee untouched and stepped outside, walking quickly down the street while his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Tamara again. "Sir," she said, her voice shaking. "It's spreading. I just got a call from Crescent Holdings. They're freezing your stake. They said it's under compliance review because of a fraud flag filed in the interbank trust system." Enoch stopped walking. "Interbank flagged me?" "Yes. And there's more. Legacy Credit followed. Penrose. Verity. Even international banks in Zurich and Singapore are halting our transfers." Enoch clenched his jaw. The interbank trust system wasn't just a local watch list. It was the pulse of the financial world, a network banks used to flag dangerous behavior. He'd used it himself in the past to block bad actors. Now his name was sitting at the top of that list like a blinking red alert. "Who triggered it?" he asked, though he already knew. "Argent," Tamara said. "They filed a level 4 alert. Global exposure." Enoch's hand trembled slightly as he ended the call and looked around. No one on the street knew what he was dealing with. To them, he looked like any other man in a fine coat with a phone and a purpose. But inside, everything was slipping. His entire financial identity was becoming radioactive. With each flag, each block, each call from a confused associate or legal rep, the net drew tighter. A few hours later, news broke again. This time it wasn't about the arrest or the video. This was worse. A prominent financial blog posted an article titled, "Mystery Man Behind Alleged Argent Scam Linked to Previous Fraud Case." The subheading, Anonymous tip claims disgraced investor Enoch Bradley used fake shell companies in 2016. The article quoted a single unnamed source who claimed Enoch had once siphoned funds through a web of offshore accounts. No evidence, no balance sheets, just old rumors freshly repackaged. Enoch read it on his phone in disbelief. They were rewriting his life in real time. He had worked too hard, too honestly, to allow these kinds of lies to take root, but the timing was perfect for those who wanted to see him fall. The video of his arrest had primed the audience, and now the allegations felt plausible. The article went viral in minutes, amplified by bots and trolls. The comments were brutal, full of venom disguised as curiosity. "So this guy's been playing us for years," one user wrote. "Makes sense. Always felt too good to be true." Another said, "You can't trust suits like him. They know how to hide dirt." Enoch's legal team began fielding calls from regulators. Not subpoenas, not yet, but questions. Lots of them. The kind that implied guilt before innocence. One caller from the Office of Financial Ethics asked if Enoch had a habit of misrepresenting his holdings. Another suggested they were preparing a formal audit. Enoch could feel it, the walls closing in. Every move he made was under surveillance. Every friend or ally who once spoke proudly of him now gave him distance. He called one former investor to explain, to plead his case, but the line went to voicemail. The message was curt: "We are currently re-evaluating all external relationships. Please do not leave confidential information." His name was turning into a curse. One by one, business partners backed away. Joint ventures were paused. Contracts dissolved overnight. A startup accelerator he had personally mentored released a statement. "Due to unfolding developments, we have severed all ties with Mr. Bradley and his associated firms." His world wasn't just retracting, it was collapsing into silence. Even the interns who once scrambled for his attention now hesitated to look him in the eye. At his headquarters, the receptionist couldn't meet his gaze. When he walked into the building, the atmosphere was colder. Half the staff were gone. Legal threats, reputational risks, rumors. It all worked faster than any formal charge ever could. The weapon wasn't just lies. It was momentum. The story had been set in motion, and now it rolled on without breaks. Tamara texted again. This time she attached a screenshot. It was a thread from a well-known venture capital forum. One post read, "Bradley's whole persona was a fraud. Quiet billionaire? Please." The guy knew he was living on borrowed time. Another chimed in. He used race as a shield. That's why people didn't look closer. Enoch stared at the screen until the text blurred. They weren't just trying to destroy his reputation. They were trying to invalidate his entire life. Everything he had built, earned, fought for, they were suggesting it had all been a ruse. And the cruelest part? People were eating it up. In the evening, a former associate appeared on national television. Davis Eddington, a man Enoch had once bailed out of bankruptcy, sat comfortably in a CNN studio, wearing the smug expression of a man capitalizing on someone else's downfall. "Look, I don't know what Enoch did or didn't do," Davis said, "but we all knew he was unconventional. He moved money fast, made deals in the shadows. Nobody gets that rich without bending some rules." The host leaned in. "Do you think he could have been hiding something?" Davis nodded gravely. "In hindsight, yes. I should have said something earlier." Inside were 6 neatly printed pages, each stamped with the seal of the state. The charges were staggering: felony fraud, attempted grand larceny, and computer intrusion with intent to defraud. Combined, they carried a potential sentence of 20 years. Enoch's hands trembled slightly as he read the allegations, each line a knife to the chest. They claimed he had attempted unauthorized access to client accounts using falsified credentials, misrepresented his holdings, and conspired to manipulate institutional funds for personal gain. None of it was true. None. But the paper didn't care. It wasn't a question anymore. It was a prosecution. Tamara came rushing into his office, panic on her face. "They sent the same letter to our law firm. They're saying the bank gave them evidence. Emails, security footage, internal logs." Enoch looked up slowly. "What evidence?" They won't share it yet, not even with us. Said it's sealed under preliminary review. Preliminary review? Enoch repeated. This is a war. His legal team, a group of elite litigators from Stanford and Yale, was assembled within the hour. They pored over the document, their expressions shifting from concern to disbelief to silent, bitter fury. This is a fabricated timeline, said Margot, the lead attorney. None of this matches the security logs we had access to before they shut us out. They're accusing him of using fake credentials to access executive accounts, another added. The same accounts that were legally registered to his name. Can we subpoena the logs? Enoch asked. We tried. Argent claims the system went through a data integrity purge right after the incident. Conveniently, all internal logs from that day are now inaccessible. Let me guess, Enoch said dryly. Corrupted, deleted, gone. They're claiming an internal review was underway when the system crashed, Margot replied. And now the digital chain of custody is broken. So the only records left are the ones they chose to preserve. Enoch stood and walked to the window, his silhouette tall and motionless against the glow of the skyline. The world outside was vibrant, full of people chasing dreams, fighting for status, struggling to make something of themselves. And here he was, drowning in falsehoods, surrounded by silence where loyalty once stood. The worst came 2 days later, when Davis Eddington returned to CNN. This time, he wasn't coy. He sat comfortably, confident, and leaned in with the smirk of a man pretending to wrestle with difficult truths. I always admired Enoch, Davis said, but you know what they say, when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. The host asked the follow-up everyone expected. Are you saying you think he's guilty? Davis hesitated, then gave a slow nod. I think he played a long game. I think he fooled a lot of people, including me. And I think the institutions are right to ask hard questions. That clip ran on loop for the next 24 hours. Every news outlet, every financial forum, every trending list. It wasn't a slow leak anymore. It was an orchestrated flood. Enoch's phone buzzed with more messages, none of them good. Silent withdrawals from deals, contract terminations, board removals. Partners he'd built empires with now claimed they didn't know him. I always thought he was too quiet, one investor said in a Forbes interview. Unreliable. That word stuck with Enoch. Unreliable. A word used to question competence, trustworthiness, humanity. They had downgraded him from visionary to liability. Inside his firm, the rot spread. Executives who had once toasted him at galas now avoided his calls. Staff began resigning. A COO emailed the board. In light of recent allegations, I believe it is no longer appropriate to remain in partnership with Mr. Bradley. Investors began demanding audits, demanding their capital be withdrawn from funds that bore his name. Institutions removed him from advisory roles, terminated non-compete clauses, seized on escape hatches in contracts. His brand, once gold, was now contaminated. Every article, every whisper, every press release compounded the narrative. They weren't just distancing themselves. They were deleting him. Even his alma mater, which had once hailed him as a model alumnus, suspended an honorary degree. Pending investigation, the letter read. His past was being rewritten in real time, and no one, absolutely no one, was standing up to stop it. Margot came to him that night. Her face was pale, her voice tired. They filed a motion for a public hearing. They're going to make a spectacle of this. Why, he asked. Why go this far? Because it's safer to destroy a symbol than to challenge a system, she said quietly. And you became a symbol, Enoch. A powerful black man who was too careful, too composed, too wealthy. That makes you dangerous. He looked at her, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes, then turned back to his desk. On it were folders, emails, a network of lies masquerading as a case. And no matter how many facts they uncovered, the perception had taken hold. The truth had drowned. The walls of his empire, built over decades, were now lined with cracks, and each betrayal was a hammer blow. What had once taken 15 years of flawless strategy, round-the-clock labor, and sacrifice to construct was unraveling in slow motion, its foundation eaten away not by incompetence or poor judgment, but by manufactured perception and institutional cowardice. Margot's legal team had launched motions, injunctions, and press statements, but the response was tepid at best, drowned out by the louder chorus of suspicion, scandal, and sensationalism. Clients weren't waiting for a verdict. They were fleeing preemptively. Enoch's flagship private equity firm, B3 Strategies, started losing capital almost immediately. Institutional investors that had once jockeyed for entry into his funds were now issuing formal withdrawal notices. They couched it in language about fiduciary duty and reputational alignment, but the truth was clear. They were severing ties to protect themselves. Within 72 hours, 3 of B3's 5 largest investors terminated their limited partner agreements. The exit clauses they invoked had rarely been used before, but in a panic, they were reactivated with surgical precision. Enoch's CFO called with a grim update. "Sir, we're looking at a 47% capital drain. If this continues, we'll breach our liquidity threshold in a week." Enoch didn't flinch. He simply said, "Document every exit. Categorized by date, fund, and region. I want a full report." He hung up and sat silently in his office, surrounded by walls lined with awards, newspaper clippings, and framed photographs of his early deals, the visual history of a man who had overcome everything. And yet, none of it shielded him from what was coming next. Creditors began circling like vultures. The banks that once extended Enoch favorable lines of credit, that offered tailored financial instruments in exchange for association with his name, were now recalling loans. Some were polite, citing terms and risk adjustments. Others were merciless, seizing collateral and threatening legal action. Notices arrived in thick envelopes, defaults, penalties, late interest accruals. One lender even filed a preemptive lawsuit claiming misrepresentation in an old financial disclosure, despite knowing the accusation wouldn't survive scrutiny. They didn't care. The goal wasn't to win, it was to bury. His legal team worked around the clock, but even Margot looked like a woman running out of rope. "They're not responding to our filings," she said in a whisper over the phone. "It's like they've coordinated a freeze. Every judge keeps punting our motions, even the ones that should be routine. We can't get anything through." The walls were tightening, not just professionally, but personally. Enoch returned to his penthouse one evening to find a manila envelope slipped beneath the door. It was from his daughter's school, a prestigious prep academy in Marin County. The letter inside was short, direct, and heartless. "In light of recent events, and after a unanimous board vote, the Academy has decided to terminate the enrollment of student Eliza Bradley, effective immediately. This decision has been made in the interest of preserving a safe and stable environment for our learning community." Enoch read the letter twice, then a third time, each word slashing deeper than the last. Eliza was 13. She had perfect grades, played violin, spoke fluent French. She had done nothing wrong, and yet they cast her out not because of anything she did, but because she was his daughter. He called the school, demanding to speak to the headmaster. He was told the headmaster was unavailable. He left a message. It was never returned. He called back the next morning and was told that the academy had no further comments at this time. Eliza didn't cry when he told her. She simply stared at the letter, then asked in a small voice, "Did I do something wrong?" Enoch's heart broke in that moment. He knelt beside her, hands on her shoulders, and said, "No, baby. This has nothing to do with you. You're perfect. This is about me, about people who don't understand what it means to stand by the truth." She nodded, but didn't speak. He could tell she didn't believe him, not because she thought he was lying, but because the world around her was telling a louder, crueler story. Her friends stopped texting. One mother blocked Tamara on the school's parent message board. The isolation grew. What began as financial collapse was now a personal siege. Enoch's home address leaked online. Protesters appeared across the street holding signs that said fraudster and corporate criminal. Some rang his intercom at midnight. Others shouted slurs from the sidewalk. The building's HOA sent him a letter asking if he might consider voluntarily relocating to avoid further disruption. His neighbors stopped acknowledging him in the elevator. The security guard who once greeted him with a smile now avoided eye contact. Inside be 3 strategies. The atmosphere was equally dire. Staff morale cratered. Top analysts submitted resignations, citing uncertainty and reputational risk. Investors were calling daily, not for updates, but for proof of life. Enoch's voice on the other end of the line wasn't enough anymore. They wanted assurances, legal ones, guarantees, immunity from the fallout. Some demanded immediate liquidation. Others floated the idea of temporary restructuring that involved removing Enoch from operational authority. The betrayal stung, but what hurt more was the realization that none of them had the courage to say it to his face. They framed it as business, but he knew what it was. Fear wrapped in the language of professionalism. Margot arrived in person one night, her eyes red from exhaustion. She sat across from Enoch in his office and laid out a new document, an emergency asset protection protocol. "It's not a fix," she said. "It won't stop the bleeding, but it could delay some of the damage. We put key funds into temporary receivership, reassign your signature authority to a neutral third party, and issue a statement saying you're stepping back pending resolution." Enoch looked at her. He reached for the phone, already knowing the news would be worse, not better. Tamara's voice was tight with urgency. "You need to see the news now." He opened the news app and was immediately hit with a wave of headlines, all screaming the same message. Enoch Bradley's empire built on deceit. New documents reveal trail of lies. One article from a major network claimed it had obtained exclusive emails that allegedly linked Enoch to a string of falsified investment structures, shell corporations, and payoffs. The emails were fake. His team had never seen them before, but they looked real enough to convince a public already conditioned to see him as guilty. The story spread like wildfire across every major outlet, across television broadcasts, and through social media networks. Cable news ran specials with dramatic timelines charting Enoch's rise and fall, full of ominous music and expert panels that speculated with reckless abandon. "How did no one see this coming?" one host asked. "How deep does the fraud go?" another added. They pored over his past like vultures picking apart a carcass. Old college essays were quoted out of context. Past business filings were examined with the assumption of guilt. Even his donations to charities were framed as potential fronts for laundering money. A news magazine ran a cover with his face digitally altered to show prison bars shadowed across his eyes, with the headline, "The Man Who Fooled Wall Street." What was once a financial story had now become a full-blown media circus. Talk shows mocked him. Comedians built entire monologues around him. Every image, every sentence he'd ever spoken in public was twisted into a weapon. Even his statement of innocence, released by Margot's office, was met with derision. "Of course he says he's innocent," one anchor scoffed. What else would he say? Margot appeared on several news panels to counter the narrative, but she was cut off, talked over, dismissed as a high-paid fixer spinning damage control. "We have records showing that Enoch Bradley owned these accounts legally," she tried to say. "We have evidence the bank's logs were manipulated." But no one wanted facts. They wanted spectacle. And Enoch was the star. Back in his penthouse, Enoch sat on the couch staring at the television. He watched footage of himself arriving at court, slowed down for dramatic effect, replayed from multiple angles. He watched a segment showing clips of his early career intercut with commentary from self-appointed experts speculating about his true motivations. He barely recognized the person they were describing. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a symbol, a cautionary tale, a spectacle to fill their time and keep the clicks flowing. His phone buzzed again. It was a message from an old friend at Harvard Business School. The message read, "I'm sorry, Enoch. They're erasing everything we built." Even the dean's distancing himself. He stared at the screen until the message dimmed. Another buzz. This time, it was his property manager informing him that a tenants meeting had voted to demand his removal from the building, citing disruptive media presence and reputational risk. His building, the place he had called home for a decade, was rejecting him like an immune system targeting an infection. That night, Enoch received another notice, this one from the Bar Association, questioning his standing on various corporate boards. They weren't accusing him yet, only inquiring. But the implication was clear. The message was being repeated across every sector of his life. We don't want you here anymore. At first, he felt numb. But as the hours dragged on and the headlines got crueler, the weight became unbearable. Alone in the apartment, surrounded by silence, Enoch began to unravel. It started with shaking hands as he read yet another article quoting a former employee who claimed he was secretive and paranoid and always talked like he had something to hide. Then came the tightness in his chest, the feeling of drowning without water, the oppressive pressure of being utterly alone in a war with no battlefield. He dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor and went dark. He sank into the couch, elbows on knees, hands covering his face. For the first time in years, Enoch Bradley wept. Not quietly, not in dignified silence, but with the full, shuddering force of a man broken by betrayal, dishonesty, and helplessness. He wept for his name, now poisoned beyond repair. He wept for his daughter, robbed of innocence and stability. He wept for every silent injustice that had brought him to this moment. The sound echoed in the hollow room like a confession. And when he finally stopped, when the sobs gave way to shallow breathing and exhaustion, he sat there in the dark, staring at nothing. The television still played in the background, his name flashing beneath pundits discussing the fall of a titan. But Enoch didn't listen anymore. Something inside him had changed. The fire that once drove him to build, to lead, to win, it hadn't gone out, but it had shifted. The corridors buzzed with reporters, assistants, and courthouse staff, but around him was a strange perimeter of quiet, a void carved out of fear, respect, or morbid curiosity. They no longer whispered insults or doubts within earshot. Now they simply stared, unsure what to say to a man who had been so thoroughly condemned by the system, yet refused to vanish as expected. Enoch didn't flinch. He had stopped reacting. That part of him had been stripped away. What remained now was steel, slow-burning and deliberate. Tamara sat beside him, clutching a leather folio with her knuckles white. She said nothing, but her presence alone was its own defiance. Across the hallway, Margot stood with a group of junior associates, speaking low and fast, strategizing how to maneuver through the legal landmines ahead. As the bailiff called them into the chamber, Enoch stood and buttoned his jacket. He stepped forward, a man walking not into judgment, but into history. The hearing itself was uneventful, procedural. Motions filed, objections noted, trial dates floated and stamped. The prosecution held its line. The defense argued lack of evidence. The judge, older and unreadable, issued a tight schedule. The next phase of battle had begun. But it wasn't what happened inside the court that changed the story. It was what happened minutes after Enoch left. As he descended the courthouse steps, flanked by Margot and Tamara, the press corps waiting outside sprang into a sudden frenzy. Shouts erupted, microphones thrust forward, cameras snapped like machine guns. But this time, it wasn't about an indictment or scandal. One reporter shouted above the others, her voice breathless with disbelief. "Mr. Bradley, can you comment on the file leak? Are you really the controlling heir of Majestic Holdings?" Enoch froze. Margot whipped her head toward the reporter. "What leak?" The reporter held up her phone, screen glowing with a breaking news bulletin. A high-profile financial journalist had published an exposé just moments before. The Bradley file, Enoch's billion-dollar bloodline revealed. The article detailed a stunning revelation. Enoch Bradley was not just a self-made financier, as most believed. He was the sole heir to a hidden financial conglomerate, Majestic Holdings, a multinational umbrella corporation that quietly controlled over 200 subsidiaries in real estate, aerospace, defense contracts, and advanced technology. His father, Franklin G. Bradley, had constructed the empire under layers of blind trusts and corporate veils, hiding the true ownership structure behind a web of legal obfuscation designed to protect it from scrutiny. Franklin had died when Enoch was just 16, and the assets had remained buried until now. The revelation sent shockwaves through the financial world. Majestic Holdings was an invisible giant, and its connection to Enoch made every accusation against him suddenly suspicious. Reporters scrambled to verify the documents, which had been leaked anonymously through a secure journalism portal. Attached were a series of legally authenticated ownership disclosures, notarized documents, and decades-old estate transfers, all confirming that Enoch Bradley had inherited control of Majestic Holdings at age 25, but had continued to operate it under the radar to avoid undue influence or manipulation. In the hours that followed, the narrative began to shift. Not dramatically, not all at once, but subtly, like a tide turning against the current. Articles that once led with fraudster began to use terms like alleged and under scrutiny. Journalists who had followed the mob began to hedge their stories, injecting doubt into what was previously reported as fact. One veteran anchor on a major network broke protocol during a live broadcast to say, "If these documents are legitimate, and they certainly appear to be, then the narrative we've been fed may be dangerously incomplete." Financial analysts began reassessing Enoch's past decisions, now viewed through the lens of quiet legacy stewardship rather than public bravado. One particularly sharp writer from an independent outlet posted a deep dive analysis titled, "The Power of Silence: How Enoch Bradley Built Majestic's Invisible Empire." The piece didn't just defend Enoch, it celebrated his restraint, his precision, and his choice to keep his inherited power private in an age obsessed with exposure. It cited his consistent philanthropy, his strategic investments, and his disciplined refusal to court publicity as evidence not of guilt, but of integrity. Enoch read the article from his office late that night. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to feel something other than dread. It wasn't vindication, not yet, but it was a fracture in the monolith of lies, a shaft of light cutting through the storm. Tamara knocked gently and stepped inside. "You saw it." "Yes," he said. "It's starting. We also got a call from the Wall Street Journal. They want to talk. Real talk. Not ambushes." Enoch nodded slowly. "Let them come, but on my terms." Margot joined them moments later, her face unreadable. "The leak helps," she said carefully. "But we still need to be smart. They're going to pivot. They won't admit wrongdoing. They'll try to spin this into you hiding assets or misleading investors." "Let them try," Enoch said. His voice was different now, measured, calm. But beneath the surface was something new, a quiet strength rebuilt from ruin. The next morning, another story broke. This one wasn't from a corporate outlet, but from a whistleblower. A former IT technician from Argent Bank stepped forward anonymously, providing a sworn affidavit and timestamp screen captures showing that Enoch's credentials had not only been valid on the day of the incident, but had been flagged for deletion in a backroom chat 2 hours before his visit. "Delete this one. Too high risk. Better to scrub it and deal with fallout later," one message read. The leak was damning. Within hours, Margot filed a motion to reopen discovery. A judge agreed. For the first time since the nightmare began, Enoch wasn't just on defense. He had leverage. The whistleblower, a former IT systems technician named Gordon Reese, had been terminated from Argent Bank weeks earlier under what were originally dismissed as performance-related issues, but now appeared clearly retaliatory. Gordon's voice, in a grainy pre-recorded video sent to investigative journalists, was calm, steady, and terrifying in its implications. "I was told to delete a high-level user profile before the visit," he said plainly. "The directive came from internal security. I flagged it. I was told to ignore my concern. I documented everything." Attached to the video were system logs, Slack conversations, internal memos, and time-stamped instructions that left little to interpretation. The logs confirmed that Enoch Bradley's executive profile was fully active and validated less than 2 hours before his arrival at Argent Bank. A red flag was manually entered under his ID by a mid-level security officer with no clearance to make such changes. Gordon's affidavit, submitted through a legal intermediary, included metadata, server snapshots, and a chain of custody diagram proving that the deletion was no accident. It was an orchestrated act of digital erasure, initiated before Enoch ever stepped through the doors. One chilling message read, "Let the floor team deal with it. We'll handle cleanup after. If he protests, escalate to external protocol." Within hours, the hashtag Justice for Enoch began trending. Independent journalists and advocacy groups rallied online, dissecting every log file, every falsified timestamp, and every layer of the cover-up. Reddit threads ballooned into thousands of comments. Twitter exploded with side-by-side comparisons of Enoch's verified credentials against Argent's redacted statements. Prominent digital rights activists called it a modern-day lynching, algorithmic, procedural, and systemic. The initial skepticism that followed the Majestic Holdings revelation gave way to an angry, swelling wave of public support. Protesters appeared outside Argent Bank's corporate headquarters in San Francisco, holding signs that read, "We see you, no more hidden executions, and black wealth is not a crime." Dozens became hundreds within hours. Civil rights groups descended upon the scene. Chants filled the air. On cable news, hosts who had once smirked at Enoch's misfortune now struggled to justify their earlier certainty. "We may have gotten ahead of the facts," one anchor admitted during a panel discussion. "There appears to be significant evidence of tampering." Another pundit, more honest, said bluntly, "We followed the story they fed us. Turns out they fed us a lie." The Argent Executive Board convened an emergency closed-door meeting, issuing a statement that claimed the bank was unaware of any internal manipulation and has launched a comprehensive audit. But the damage had already reached escape velocity. A former security supervisor, perhaps feeling the heat, came forward anonymously and confirmed that a quiet directive had been passed down through unofficial channels to isolate any anomalies related to Enoch Bradley's access. Anomalies, in this case, meant a man with too much power, too much composure, and the wrong skin color. The conversation around race, class, and the illusion of accountability in high finance erupted nationwide. Think pieces, op-eds, and documentaries began development in real time. Everyone wanted a piece of the reckoning now that the tide had turned. Enoch, for his part, remained mostly silent. His legal team, guided by Margot's precision and fury, submitted a formal motion to dismiss all charges on the basis of criminal misconduct and obstruction. The judge, pressured by growing public outcry and irrefutable evidence, granted an emergency hearing. Margot spoke with controlled fire. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a glitch. This was a targeted, deliberate dismantling of my client's digital identity, professional credibility, and personal dignity. When she presented the logs, the court fell silent. Even the prosecution sat rigid, their confidence leaking like a punctured tire. By the end of the hearing, the judge agreed to halt proceedings until a full internal review could be conducted. It wasn't an exoneration, not yet, but it was the first real acknowledgement that Enoch Bradley had been wronged. Outside the courthouse, the crowd of supporters had grown. Tamara walked beside Enoch as they exited, both surrounded by cameras. But this time the shouts were not accusations. They were declarations of support. "We believe you, Enoch. Fight back. They tried to erase you." Enoch lifted his head, not with arrogance, but with quiet clarity. He nodded to the crowd, still choosing his words carefully. When a reporter asked if he would sue Argent Bank, he said simply, "Truth first, justice second, vengeance last." That quote trended for 24 hours. News cycles began dissecting not just the bank's behavior, but the media's own complicity in spreading unverified claims. An internal review at one major network led to the resignation of a senior editor. Another publicly apologized. "We failed our journalistic responsibility," the anchor read. "We treated allegations as truth and truth as inconvenience." Enoch's team was contacted by human rights organizations, international watchdogs, and even members of Congress requesting briefings. One senator tweeted, "The Enoch Bradley case is a warning. We must legislate against silent digital execution." The board of Majestic Holdings, previously silent, released a statement of unequivocal support. Mr. Bradley was targeted, violated, and nearly destroyed by a coordinated assault on his identity and legacy. We stand with him. That public endorsement did more than boost Enoch's image. It stabilized his financial position. Investment firms that had severed ties began to quietly reach out, not to make amends, but to negotiate paths back. Enoch refused most of them. They left when it mattered, he told Tamara. They don't get to come back just because it's safe now. Still, his strategic brilliance remained intact. Margot floated a plan to consolidate influence around key sectors using the majestic structure. Use the structure to isolate the rot, she said. Rescue what matters. Argent Bank, which had for months projected unwavering confidence and refused to admit fault, was now facing a tsunami of legal, financial, and reputational consequences that no amount of spin could contain. The federal court issued a subpoena for all internal communications dated from 1 month prior to the incident up until the day of Enoch's arrest. At first, the bank's legal team tried to resist, citing data privacy protocols and internal review policies. But the judge overseeing the case had changed his tone, no longer indifferent, now visibly irritated by months of delay, obfuscation, and now a growing mountain of credible accusations. He overruled every objection. He granted full access to digital archives, including Slack channels, email logs, security directives, and executive memos. What came next was a purge. Within 24 hours, 5 senior executives at Argent were placed on administrative leave. 48 hours later, 3 of them were terminated. The 4th resigned. The 5th, a former vice president of operations, was arrested by federal agents outside his vacation home in Napa on charges of obstruction of justice, digital tampering, conspiracy to defraud, and civil rights violations. His arrest video, leaked to the press, was played in ironic symmetry beside the footage of Enoch being tackled inside the bank. The message was clear: the public wanted symmetry, and now it was getting it. Margot, now flanked by a bolstered legal team and backed by major civil rights organizations, moved swiftly. A multi-claim civil suit was filed against Argent Bank on behalf of Enoch, citing reputational damage, financial loss, emotional trauma, and malicious intent. Within hours, Enoch's legal team received settlement inquiries, not from junior lawyers, but from the bank's board liaison itself. They were offering undisclosed terms. Enoch declined. "No silence money," he told Margot. "I want the apology public, the documents unsealed, and the policy changes signed." As pressure mounted, the bank stock dropped 10 points in a single day. Several major corporate clients issued suspension notices. A protest outside Argent's headquarters now blocked traffic for blocks. The signs were no longer just about Enoch. They were about systemic targeting, digital profiling, and the weaponization of bureaucracy. Journalists, hungry for redemption and perhaps guilt-ridden, began releasing special reports tracing the timeline of the scandal. The media's mea culpa came swiftly. One network ran a 20-minute primetime segment titled, "We Got It Wrong, The Enoch Bradley Story." Another released a podcast episode titled, "Truth Buried, The Anatomy of a Modern Frame Job." Old clips of pundits laughing or dismissing Enoch as a scam artist were now resurfacing, not as analysis, but as shameful artifacts of how the system eats its own. A few anchors apologized on air. Others avoided the topic entirely, disappearing from their time slots for personal leave. The Justice Department, under mounting political and public pressure, announced the formation of a special task force to investigate racially motivated abuses in financial institutions. Enoch's case was cited as the trigger. Congressional hearings were scheduled. And through it all, Enoch remained measured, never gloating, never retaliating, simply waiting for the truth to finish catching up. His public statement, released through Margot's office, read in part, "This is not about me. It never was. It is about a system that believes power can erase truth. That story just met its end." When Argent finally issued its public apology, it came not as a press release, but as a full-page ad in every major national paper, accompanied by a press conference from the CEO himself. "We failed," the CEO admitted, his voice tight and rehearsed. "We failed, Mr. Bradley. We failed our duty. And we failed the public trust." Standing behind him were board members with visibly strained expressions. The apology was carefully worded but unmistakable. Enoch Bradley was innocent. His identity had been deliberately erased. His treatment was unjust, discriminatory, and inexcusable. Within 24 hours, Enoch's frozen assets were released. His business licenses, board seats, and advisory roles were reinstated without delay. Companies that had once abandoned him now scrambled to show support. They issued public apologies of their own. Invitations reappeared. Speaking engagements returned. One company even offered to rename a campus building in his honor. Enoch accepted none of them. He declined every award, every post-scandal honor, every panel invite. He wasn't interested in applause. He was interested in restoration, on his own terms. Majestic Holdings, which had remained in silent support, issued a brief statement confirming Enoch's full control of all operations and assets. They revealed updated valuations, placing total holdings at over $2.8 billion, a figure that sent waves through financial markets. For the first time since the ordeal began, news outlets stopped referring to Enoch as a subject of investigation and instead began using titles like entrepreneur, visionary, executive, and most notably, survivor. He appeared on one interview, and only one. It was not on a corporate platform, but a small, independent show hosted by a journalist who had refused to speculate during the height of the scandal. Sitting in a modest studio, Enoch spoke clearly. "I was erased by people who didn't want me to exist in their world. And when they failed, they wanted to pretend it never happened. But it did happen, not just to me, to others like me. The difference is I had resources. Most don't." The clip went viral. It was reposted millions of times with captions like "The truth has a face," and "The system failed the wrong man." His daughter's school, under mounting public protest and a deluge of parent petitions, issued a formal reinstatement and apology. Enoch declined the offer. He had enrolled Eliza elsewhere, in a school that valued transparency and inclusion. He told her, "They don't get you back because they fear me now. You deserve better than fear." At his firm, B3 Strategies, staff who had stayed were reinstated into new positions. Enoch restructured the executive team, promoted those who stood by him, and cut ties with silent collaborators. Weeks after Argent Bank's public fall from grace and the courtroom reversals that shattered the false narrative surrounding Enoch Bradley's identity, the world began to settle into the quiet aftermath of a storm that had exposed more than corruption. It had unmasked the fragility of truth when held hostage by power. Yet amidst the debris of ruined reputations, collapsed alliances, and media apologies, something else was beginning to form, a ripple of reckoning that pushed beyond punishment and into the realm of change. The bank executives who had orchestrated or allowed the digital erasure of Enoch's credentials found their world shrinking. Headlines once filled with derision aimed at Enoch now printed their names alongside words like disgraced, indicted, and complicit. The vice president who had authorized the credential deletion saw his assets frozen under a DOJ civil seizure order. Another executive, the one who had falsely briefed internal counsel about Enoch's access, was subpoenaed for 3 additional investigations. Friends vanished. Former allies wouldn't return calls. Private firms rescinded job offers. One, in a particularly humiliating incident, was escorted out of a Harvard lecture hall mid-session after students staged a walkout. The message was spreading. Silence in the face of injustice is not neutral. It is collaboration. Yet Enoch, despite being the victim of this institutional assault, never once demanded their downfall. He never publicly named them, never posted about their disgrace, never gloated over their exposure. Instead, he focused on rebuilding systems that wouldn't need redemption. Systems built to protect truth before power. Then came the letters. They arrived discreetly, handwritten or carefully typed, sent through legal intermediaries or mutual acquaintances, but always with the same tone. Not apologies loaded with legal escape hatches, but acknowledgments of harm. "I should have spoken up," one began. "I let fear guide my silence," said another. "You don't owe me forgiveness, but I owe you truth." At first, Enoch didn't reply. He read each letter in the quiet of his study, weighing them not as absolution, but as evidence of a shifting conscience in the hearts of those who once enabled his erasure. Then he began to respond, not with warmth or platitudes, but with clarity. "Your silence hurt more than your action," he wrote to one. "But your admission is a first step toward integrity. I do not forget, but I am not here to destroy. Word of his responses traveled slowly, building a reputation not just of vindication, but of principled resolve. That balance, unshaken strength without bitterness, made him more than a survivor. It made him a symbol. When Congress invited Enoch to testify before the Subcommittee on Financial Ethics and Institutional Discrimination, he didn't hesitate. He walked into the Capitol building flanked not by PR handlers or camera crews, but by Tamara and Margot, who had stood beside him when it cost something to do so. The hearing room was packed, cameras mounted like silent sentinels watching history unfold. Enoch's prepared statement was short but surgical. He spoke not as a victim seeking pity, but as a citizen demanding better. My name was erased by a system that preferred compliance over truth, prejudice over process, and reputation over responsibility, he said. This is not about me. This is about the next person, the next name, the next profile deleted without defense. He detailed the steps of his erasure, how the deletion of one line of code became a domino that threatened his legacy, his family, and his freedom. He explained how institutional silence enabled injustice and how media recklessness magnified it. I survived because I had resources, he said. But survival should not be a privilege. It should be a right. The chamber sat still as he finished. There were no applause breaks, no performative outbursts, only silence heavy with realization. Afterward, legislators across party lines issued calls for reform. The Enoch Bradley Digital Integrity Act was drafted within a month, proposing safeguards for digital identity protections, whistleblower escalation pathways, and regulatory oversight for financial access denial based on race or unsupported accusations. Enoch declined any political position or advisory role. My job isn't to enter the system, he said to Margot. It's to remind them that people like me are watching it. Meanwhile, his daughter Eliza settled into her new school with quiet resilience. She joined a debate team, started piano lessons, and began writing essays about justice and courage. One evening, she asked him, "Do you think they're sorry?" Enoch paused before answering. "Some are. Some just regret being caught. But some are learning." That night, he looked out at the skyline, not as a battlefield, but as a place of possibility again. He had spent months being dragged through the public square, labeled, judged, discarded, and finally reclaimed, not because justice had always been available, but because he refused to accept anything less. His name had become a rallying cry. #Justice for Enoch had grown beyond his case, adopted by activists supporting others denied banking access, entrepreneurs targeted for their background, and whistleblowers erased for telling inconvenient truths. Majestic Holdings, once a silent giant, began funding initiatives to support digital equity and financial access for underrepresented communities. Enoch chaired none of them. He remained in the background, ensuring others had the spotlight. "If I become the center," he told Tamara, "they'll make this about me. But this is about everyone who ever had to prove they deserve to exist." In the final press conference on the matter, when asked what he would do next, Enoch looked straight into the lens and said, "I will keep building, and I will keep watching, because justice is not a verdict. It's a responsibility, and silence is no longer an option." The room fell quiet. The story that began with a man slammed to the floor for walking into a bank ended not with retribution, but with redefinition. Enoch Bradley had not just survived the machine, he had forced it to see itself, and in doing so, made it just a little less dangerous for whoever would come next. The end. If you enjoyed the story and want to see more narratives that dive deep into truth, justice, and redemption, make sure to like this and subscribe. It helps more than you know. What did you think of Enoch Bradley's journey? Were there moments that hit hard or surprised you? Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts and where you're watching from. I'm always reading through and love hearing how these stories resonate across different places.